Jeremy, could you start us off by doing roll call, please?
Yes, ma'am. Chair Sheila Lamin Khashoggi,
Present.
Vice Chair Genevieve C. Sims,
Apologize, present.
thank you, ma'am. Mr. Gerald Takano,
Present.
Mr. David Bland,
Here.
Mr. Greer Webb,
Present.
Mr. Deontay Thomas,
Present. Thank you.
thank you. Mr. Johnny Thomas, and Dr. Cindy Cottle,
Present.
thank you, and Mr. Ty Harrell.
Present.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. We're gonna get started. We're gonna first ask, have everyone looked over the agenda for February 23rd, 2020?
Move its approval.
Any second?
Seconded.
All in favor, just raise your hand. Approve of the agenda. Agenda has passed. We're now moving over to the minutes from previous meeting, January the 26th, 2020. Everyone get the minutes?
Madam Chair, I move their approval as received.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, just raise your hand. Minutes have been approved from January 26, 2020. We will now have our liaisons report, staff report. Demetrius,
Good evening, everyone. Great to see you all. I'm going to make the staff liaison pretty quick. Our new DEI director, Dr. Hamilton, is with us this evening, and I will allow her to introduce herself. I think this is the perfect time for her to just introduce herself and share a little bit about herself. Dr. Hamilton, please take us away.
Thank you, Demetrius. Good evening. I'm so excited to join you today. I am to formally introduce myself. As Demetrius said, my name is Dr. Artina Hamilton. I am joining you from Boston. I recently moved to the area, well, still transitioning, where I was at Brandeis University as a director of diversity. But prior to that, I spent the large majority of my life in higher education, where I taught as a professor. Formerly, I am a geographer, so a lot of my work specifically deals with anti-Blackness in communities and spatial violence. So the work that you're doing certainly is extremely important and timely, and I'm here to support you and to provide additional resources. And I hope that as we move forward, we can think of how to work collaboratively. And again, as a director, as I've told my team, I'm very interested in supporting the organization, but also our everyday citizens. One of the words that I like to add on to equity inclusion is belonging. That truly, when we talk about everyday spaces, it's about exclusion or belonging. And we want to make sure that we can eradicate the violences that exist every day, everywhere, and create belonging. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
yes, David.
Dr. Hamilton, as you come to our role as the Police Advisory Committee, one of the areas that we are purely advisory to the City Council, yet many of our tasks and responsibilities really get at the heart of some of the things that are going on in the police department and issues in the community. What is your impression, or what is your assessment of the role of a police advisory committee in terms of greater community involvement and action?
Well, what I'd like to know, I guess, first is how involved you are now. I think it
Very
has.
little.
Okay. What does that mean though when you say very little? Are you meeting with the RPD currently?
No,
Okay.
I think when you have a chance to read the report that our Community Engagement Committee has prepared, it's extensive, but basically, and Jeremy, don't let me speak for you, but basically it's all new stuff. I mean, we've been in existence now for for well over a year and a half. And so, I would hope, only reason I've raised that is that I would hope that when you get on board and are really get into the trenches, that you would help us. Jeremy has met with somebody, I forgot who it is, Jeremy, but Jeremy has met with somebody on staff, I think your staff. And, it's time for us to start moving and grooving. And one of the things that, I'd like for us to do is there are several cities in North Carolina that have comparable boards to us. I think we need to be meeting with them and finding out how they're functioning and how we might better fulfill the expectations that the community has of us. And they do have expectations of us.
Well, I
But I
know
am
that.
glad to have you on board. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And Demetrius has made me aware of some of the work that you've done. And I'm also, of course, looking at similar organizations across the country. But I also would like this time to hear more from your perspective on what you think the scope of the work is and where you would like the work headed. That would be important because I think I can get one picture, obviously, from documents, but for me, I'm a people person. I want to hear from you, exactly what do you think is going on and where we should go with the work.
Very good. Well, I think when you have the opportunity to meet with us, I'm hoping we can start doing this in person fairly soon. I suspect that you would have a great opportunity to get an earful of the things that we would like to do and greater involvement that we could have with the community. One of the issues for me anyway is we are continuing to see just really, I will say, traumatic interaction between the police, our police force and the community. And God knows we need somehow or another to be talking to the community, trying to make the community feel like that we really are aware of what's going on and we really want to help make some differences and bridge some gaps, because there are certainly gaps right now. But I'll hush with that.
Yeah.
Is there any more questions for Dr. Hamilton? We
And
don't
also,
want, we
I'm
don't
so
want to
sorry.
overload her either, but if anyone, any other questions for her? Dr.
And also I'll
Hamilton.
say, I don't want to take up too much of your time because you have an agenda, but you can also set a time to talk to me as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hamilton. We appreciate you coming in and just allowing us to introduce ourselves and you introduce yourselves to this board. I know you have other boards, but we appreciate you tonight taking out your time. We know you haven't really settled, but taking your time out for coming and introducing yourselves. And, you know, I heard a lot of great things about you, and I'm sure you will help us with this board and leading us in the right direction for the community, as well as bridging the gap with our task at hand, which is policies for with the police, Raleigh PD. The next thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna do the chair's report. Any, Demetrius, you don't have anything else, correct? Okay.
Correct.
Okay, so the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a report, give you an update on the recommendations. I think everybody has, I hope everybody got the email from, these are the recommendations from last year that we did with the Chief Patterson. Well, it was before Chief Patterson, it was the former chief, Chief Dick Brown, that we sent. I hope you all got a copy. Did everybody get a copy of that email?
Yes.
Did everybody understand what she was saying about, and we have to be mindful that she's only been 6 months in, but I really appreciate her comments and the taking the time and looking over and continue to look over the recommendations. Greer, I see you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. More of a quick comment and kind of assessing what other board members think. I thought we did, as we've discussed previously, good job of compiling that and putting that in a very readable, very understandable and comprehensible format, Madam Chair. So thank you for doing all of that. I was a little confused, I guess I could say, as to what has changed from the time that we made our recommendations. It wasn't clear to me what actionably has been changed, other than them just throwing the language of them, meaning the Raleigh Police Department, throwing the language of the policies back at us. And so I was just wondering if other board members thought the same way, or if we're all comfortable with that response, because, and we can get to this later if there's time, Madam Chair. I know the community and the public is not able to see our emails, but I am aware, and other board members, of course, are aware of recent actions involving the Raleigh Police Department and the community and uses of force. And so while that's currently under investigation, I just wanted to kind of check the pulse of the other board members and see if we're all, if we're accepting that response, because I didn't really see it outlined as to how between 2020 and now those policies have been changed, specifically based on our recommendations. I see some
Madam
people
Chair.
nodding, so I didn't know if others had thoughts.
Madam
Ms.
Chair, if I might
Genevieve?
address that.
Yes,
Greer, I think if you do a very careful, I think if you do a very careful reading of the chief's response, you will see that what she has indicated in just about every policy except for the facial recognition policy, those policies were updated after we sent our recommendations over. So the policies that she references in here were all updated again after we sent ours over. So I don't quite understand what you mean by the changes in the policy. So if you look at them carefully, and the facial recognition is the only policy that had not been updated since our recommendations went over in April or May.
Madam Chair,
yes, David.
Genevieve, I recognize what you're saying and the introductory comments that are made on each of these policy areas. But just as an example, in the policy regarding body worn cameras, if you read that, the first two sentences of that paragraph, that's not what we even suggested.
Correct.
So that's number one. Number two, if you go to the facial recognition one, it says the updated edition of this policy became effective in June of 2021. And, and if you look at, I thought that Sheila did a superb job of writing a response back then about the facial recognition, and this doesn't address it at all.
Okay, I'm
So
sorry.
I don't think, in my personal
I'm not
opinion,
reading the chief's response the same way you're reading the chief's response.
well,
What I'm reading in the chief's response is, number one, she's new to the city. She has not had a chance to make a thorough review of every recommendation that we have made, because she does not have the historical background to
Well,
make that thorough recommendation. If you'll just pardon me for a second. Okay, and what I'm seeing in her response is that several of the policies that we referred to have been updated since we sent our recommendations over. There's nothing in here that says that she has adopted our recommendations or all of our recommendations. So that's where, and I don't see anything that says that they are required to adopt all of our recommendations. I think they're required to consider our recommendations and determine which of those they can implement.
I would like to also say, I have been in contact with the chief and talked with the chief and sat down with the chief about the recommendations, including this week. She's gonna go thoroughly through the recommendations, that means go back through the history of really about these recommendations that we have said and go back through the policy. That does take time on top of what's going on in her regular duties as what's going on in our city. And a lot of things is going on, but she did affirm that, and we talked extensively that she will go back and look at the history, and that's the key that we have to understand, that she is going to go back and look at what we had written and what was the actual policy. So, because a lot of these recommendations that was changed was before she got on board, before she came on board. Greer. Hold on a minute, David Greer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, I don't want to dwell on this, but I think, and I would love again to hear other board members' perspectives, because I saw some nodding of heads, some shaking of heads. So I'm just trying to get a grasp, because the title of what I see is Interim Report, PAB Policy Recommendations Response. And so to me, I understand that some of these were changed before she came in, but if this is actually her response and you're saying, well, she might respond again more thoroughly, I think there's just some confusion as to, well, then what's the point of even looking at this current response if she didn't really have the time, or her department didn't have, or her office didn't have the time to go back and actually make, fulfilling responses? Why aren't we just waiting on, if this is not the final response to our recommendations following 2020, then what exactly is this, and what was looked at in this time?
Well, Greer, you got to understand too that we can, the board was asking for where's the recommendations, and like I said, she indicated to us she has been here only 6 months. There's a lot of things that have taken place in Raleigh, and she have been here only 6 months. I believe I'm like Genevieve, that these recommendations, even though she's responding, that's not necessary. We need to know what so far they are saying and what she has to go back and look at. So that's very important, that if we have a discrepancy, she knows we have a discrepancy, and it might further her to go back into history of what has taken place. So this is a good thing that she did respond, so she can go back and look at and actually look at what has really taken place in the history. Sometimes you get busy and you didn't look at the history, you just looking at that's how she can actually talk to her people, talk to whoever is writing these policies. You understand what I'm saying?
In a way, I'll let Mr. Bland go, but in a way, I guess I'm just a little confused as to, I think it would have made more sense. I mean, hindsight is 2020, to say, okay, I see your recommendations, I hear them, give me some time to go back and check the history, and here will be my response. But instead, we have a response, but it's not into Ms. Genevieve's points, Ms. Sims' point. I mean, it would have been better to say either, we're going to implement these recommendations that you have and not these. I just think this kind of, if you're saying this is a response to our recommendations from 2020, but we're also waiting on her to respond even more deeply, it's just, I guess, to me, why don't we just wait until she has had all the time to go back through the history and our recommendations and give us one final response? But I guess you're saying the police chief's response may change from what we're seeing now. And
Correct.
then after she's been given some time to go through the history. So
Correct. Just give her,
might confuse us.
to me, if I was looking at, and I'm a policy and procedure person, I'm an analysis, y'all know that. So if it was me, I would want to see exactly what you're looking for, so I could go back and see history. So now she's looking, now she knows she has to go back in that history and look and see what exactly that the response should be. I mean, I'm a policy person, so I understand that, you know, if you don't have time and you only been here and things are loading up, she's getting what she can now, because we have been asking since last year, since she came up, I think almost every meeting, what about our last year recommendations? What about our last year recommendations? I think what she said in here was very true. She's only been here 6 months, but here are the changes. But now she knows she has to go back in history to find out what are we talking about and what needs to take place at this point. And we might have a more speedy, now a more speedy answer, a more definite answer.
Right. Could you explain, sorry, what you mean by history though? What, you know, she needs to necessarily go back and see that's not available now? I just don't want us to be delayed in this process anymore so we can get on with our other actions. What else does she need to see other than, I'm sure she has all of the 21 CP resources that were given to Deck Brown and then our recommendations. I'm sure she's been briefed on what happened in the summer of 2020. So I just want us to make sure we're holding ourselves accountable, and what history are we thinking between now and the next few months she's going to uncover that's not available now?
Well, let me give you something about policies, especially by me looking up policies. And y'all know I look up a lot of policies, and it takes time. I'm gonna just tell you, it takes time to look at policies. And for her, with me, I have that availability. I mean, I have that flexibility. But with her, she has all this other stuff. So with policies, what she has to do is look, when we're talking about history, that's not necessary that she really looked up all of Raleigh's history of what has taken place. Because remember, she has a whole police department to actually, you know, to go through and to different things to change at the same time. So with me, I would be, as a policy procedure, a lot of times when I used to write policies or rewrite policies, I would have to go back, I would do a draft. And then when I got through doing that draft and there was changes, they said, well, Sheila, you missed this, or you didn't do this, you need to go back further. I had to go back further, and that took me time.
Sheila?
Yes, David.
I certainly appreciate the position you've taken, and I understand Genevieve's comment, but in all due respect to all of the discussion, I understand that the RPD and whomever does not have to take every recommendation that we make or every aspect of every recommendation, but they do have the responsibility to respond to the specifics of our recommendation. And you did a superb job in your analysis of the CP report. And, you know, I would respectfully request that maybe Dr. Hamilton could help us on this. Have her read the dadgum, you know, you wrote a 4 or 5 page email about your analysis of that report. All she's got to do is read your analysis and read the specific recommendations of the CP report, and she would know what our position is. And she would also know that if in fact the rewrites of those policies that she says has already been rewritten, she would know that Chief Deck Brown did not address our recommendations.
I understand what you're saying, David. I hear you both. I understand what you're saying, Jeremy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to address what Greer proposed to the board. I echo your sentiments and also the Vice Chair's sentiments, and I am appreciative to to the police for responding. I think I'm cautious of those who have a very simplistic approach to complex realities. And I think I understand that, I don't know, like, it's traumatic for us that we're still healing from George Floyd's murder, right? And the same reality happens in our city. And so, Greer, I understand the urgency of the now. I do. But I think it's also important that our community outreach then, because if RPD looks at us, they're like, who the hell do you think you are? I mean, oh God, we're recorded. Who do we think the board is? Like, if we have no relationship with them, they're not gonna listen to us. And I think all the more important, our work in community outreach, in building that bridge respectfully. And so I understand where you're coming from and where many of our citizens, our people are coming from. But I'm Catholic. Moving an organization is never easy. I'm not defending Chief Patterson. She can defend herself. But I'm just saying, moving a big organization, I don't know. Either we move really fast and forget. And when you say what history, I think Madam Chair was noting for policies, what precipitated this policy from existing? If we do not go down to the roots of the problems we're having, what are we doing? And I think that the chair noted that she is aware that she's new. She wants to date our city. She wants to hear from everybody. And I'm sorry. I guess
No, Jeremy, you're
privileged,
Jeremy.
Madam Chair.
And what I'm saying is, when I met with the chief and when I talked to her Friday, and we have been conversating, I felt more at ease than I have felt in the beginning, that she is willing to work whatever we need to do to make sure these recommendations or what we say be heard. I felt more comfortable than I have felt before. At least she gave me an opportunity to meet with her person to person, then called me and we had a conference call and we talked about, that was more than what we have ever had in our chief of police before. So I am willing, and I will stand by what I'm saying. And I'm sure Cindy and Deontay, not saying when they do dissertations, when they have to do something, it takes a lot of preparation to look at different things, different laws, different things. It's not an easy task. I mean, Congress go back and forth over and over to write legislature. They just don't do it at one shot. So this is not going to be a one-shot fixed thing. And that's what I'm telling you. Policy is not a one-shot thing. You have to keep rewriting. You have to keep making sure that the person that you're working with is cooperative and can do exactly what we need in order to make the change. Change
Sheila,
does
let
not
me
happen
ask-
in 6 months. It's
Sheila,
not
let
going to
me ask-
happen, but at least she recognized there is something happening. And anybody can shake their head, but they need to go and learn about political science and how policy and procedure and laws are really made and be implemented. It takes rewriting. We just have to keep at it. And we have a chief that is very, very willing to actually work with us. And you know, we have to keep on this because we got another policy coming up. We got several policies coming up, so that's going to pile up. But at least she's willing to continue first policy, first recommendations as well. Greer.
Sheila, let me ask you a quick question before we go
Sure.
to Greer.
Madam Chair,
What-
point of order, please.
Hold on for a minute.
The
Greer,
constitution-
David,
Mr. Kano wishes to be recognized.
Who?
Mr. Gerald wants to be recognized.
Gerald. I didn't see him. Go, Gerald.
Just so I get a clear understanding now, Greer, I think your original concern with the response was it did contain specifics of what was incorporated or that what recommendations the board had made that were incorporated specifically to each policy. That's what I'm getting from what your concerns were, that you would like to see specifically which of the board's policies are in the recommendations are in the policies that were revised.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
That's correct. And I was just confused on the process because tonight
Yeah.
is the first time I heard that she's going to be coming out with more response to our recommendations.
And on the other perceptions of the on her response, I agree that the tone is very positive. And again, as Sheila said, is that when you're dealing with policies, there is no real end to it. There's always going to be opportunities to revisit policies, especially our recommendations. And I think that her response kind of on a positive side shows that there is an opportunity for further collaboration and understanding of specifically which policy recommendations that they thought was consistent to include. Also, get feedback on the policy recommendations that they did not implement and why. Because like I said, it's about understanding why things fit and why things don't fit. And again, it's an opportunity to have further conversations about specific policies, specific points, and have an understanding of how the community may view it and how the police department views it in terms of risk management and operations. I said overall, like I said, I understand your concern, the lack of detail, but on the other side, I say it's an opportunity for us to move forward and an opportunity for us to be able to engage the police department officially, to have someone, or some group be able to have a conversation with us about our policy recommendations and future ones.
Sheila, just a quick question. Do you think after your meeting with the chief this past Friday, do you think that it would be productive and helpful to her for you or someone else or a group of us to summarize the history behind each one of these recommendations so that she would better understand it? Or do you feel that she has enough information?
I think she would have enough information. She just has to go back, David.
Very well, then I drop my comments.
She just has to go back. Greer.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This is my last comment on this point. I know we're a little over halfway, and so if a motion needs to be made like it's done in the past to extend 10 minutes, I think the Acorns conversation is important. So if need be, I'm happy to make that motion. Just want to respond to Gerald. I agree with you, Gerald. I just, while we were speaking, did a quick lookup of the public policies of the RPD on the RPD website. And then I also have pulled up our recommendations, and I'm just not seeing that enough was done in response to our recommendations. So all of that is to say, I know that the police, I'll be the first one to say, are overworked, and underpaid. I know she just got in here, the chief, 6 months ago. I just don't want us to sell ourselves short. And so to Jeremy's point about why the hell should they listen to our board, and I think the H word is okay. I'm also Christian. Well, this board was created because the police were not doing their jobs in an equitable manner, right? This board was pushed for by the community of Raleigh for years and years before it was recognized after the horrific murder of George Floyd. And so I think it's important that we hold ourselves accountable and that we also are not too deferential, that we're respectful, but that we also hold accountable the police department, because we've been working hard to compile our recommendations. And if they're just going to be thrown to the wind, right? Or if we're going to get these kind of, piecemeal responses, that's okay, because it does show a willingness to respond, but we want to make sure that we are truly being heard and are able to build that trust with the community. And so, Jeremy, to your point, I hear you, and I think our proposal that you sent over this week is a good one. I just want us to also understand that the impetus for this board was holding police officers accountable and suggesting how they can operate in a manner that would build trust with the community. And so I just don't want us to forget that. We weren't created to be a mouthpiece for the police department by any means. And so if we keep that in mind, I think we're continue down the right track. That's all.
And I agree
Well
with
said.
you, Gerald. I agree with you, Greer, that we won't keep, it won't go to the back burner. The board has to keep it to the forefront just to let them know we're still wanting that change and wanting to see those policies change. But all I was saying is give her that opportunity, but continue to make sure those changes that you're not seeing be made done. You understand what I'm saying? And so that's what I'm saying, but we do have other policies that we do have to also send recommendations to. So we need to continue our work and not get stuck on last year's policies. Just keep it right there. We don't have to put it all the way in the back. Make sure we can always bring it up every time. Bring it up so that we, give some time and just revisit it again, maybe every 2 or 3 months, but make sure they're being looked at again. And, but we have to move forward. Okay.
Very well.
We're going to the reviewing of the recommendations of the Acorns recommendations. Now, Miss Genevieve, you want to take that? The Acorn reviewing the recommendations. Have everyone received the Acorn recommendations?
Yes.
Any questions, Mr. Ty?
Sorry, I had to take myself off mute. No questions. I was just affirming that I was in receipt of the information that you indicated.
Madam Chair, let me ask a procedural question.
Sure.
Are we then going to go over each recommendation that was printed, like 1, 2, 3, 4, et cetera? Because each one of these has got to be addressed, I think.
Okay, we can go over the recommendations of Acorn. Anyone got theirs pulled up?
I have it pulled up too. I think it may be helpful for us all to pull it up. I know some emails again were sent back and forth.
Yeah.
Between David, maybe Dr. Cotto and some other folks. So if we could pull that up and make sure we lock down the language. In addition, Madam Chair, I know I emailed you as well. There were just a few grammatical errors throughout the document, but that's easy to fix. I just want us to note that we should read through all of these at the end and make sure that they've been run through a scanner or maybe another set of eyes for grammar and spelling. But overall, I think, yes, maybe walking through them, especially hearing from Dr. Cotto on some of those mental health points, I think we need to do.
Okay, Cindy, do you want to start with the recommendations, since they have some questions for some of them?
I'm happy to start wherever. I think it's a complex procedure that we've gone through here, and in terms of, we were preparing this for a preliminary step. Is that right? Would you agree? I don't know if the rest of the board knows about that piece.
Yes.
Do you want to speak on that while I get my cat out of the way? I'm so sorry.
Hold on. Genevieve, you want to speak on it? Because I'm trying to get mine up.
Since I was not at your last committee meeting, I don't know what Cindy's referring to. So no, I don't want to speak on that.
Okay. Gerald?
Yeah, this, like I said, as a preliminary step, this will be what we take in and again, arrange a meeting with the police department to discuss each of the points and our recommendations and why we're recommending each of the various points you're seeing. Again, the various points are covering in multiple areas, because we're trying to take into account all your concerns with the policy and then different solutions or recommendations. One of the recommendations is points are based upon changing the mission of the unit to where it's a civilian-only unit. So you could see the different recommendations of changing it to civilian. The other part is, of course, it's currently operating, so we have to be pragmatic. And so the other ones are dealing with current operation in its current form with both sworn and non-sworn personnel, and then addressing the pragmatics of that, dealing with the attachments or other operational things. And you can see the different recommendations that deal with if it is in a continuing form as a sworn plus non-sworn, recommendations to improve risk and operability, both not just to the public, but also for the department and those involved in the unit too. So that's the recommendations, the premise for those recommendations. And again, overall, it is to, if whatever is recommended by the board is that's what we'd like to take to the police department, arrange a meeting, another conversation with the policy and procedure board with them so we can go start talking about background and history of why we are recommending certain things. Okay, they can respond, okay, on what their intent, things are that are not written in the policies, which can affect policies, and we can have a substantive conversation about the current policy and our recommendations with the police department and have a better understanding of the different points of view we may not have from them.
I actually thought that we were as a step before that, preparing this for the city council first to
Yeah,
help
you're
them
right,
understand
exactly.
the broader picture. And so that's why it's worded. There were some email exchanges about that, and that's why it was kind of presented in this way. And I think when we did the subcommittee meeting, the request was that we keep the document intact and then bullet point, this is what we would change about this section. This is what we change about that section. So that's one reason for that part of the document. Does that sound about right?
Cindy?
Yeah.
Cindy,
Yes.
relative to that, that's what I understood that you all were doing. And in some instances, relative to the recommendations, you have actually proposed complete rewording or amending the wording of like the policy or this team staffing. I would request, there were several others here where you said, well, maybe you ought to include this statement or you ought to add a bullet, whatever. It seems to me that you ought to be consistent, that if you are recommending a rewording of a particular policy or segment thereof, that you would actually devise the wording, not because in several of these, like for example, items, where is it? Okay, for example, item 11. You have done both ways. You recommended a wording in one section, and then you said, well, maybe you ought to add this or you ought to delete that. You need to, like, for example, whatever your recommendation 11 is related to in their policy, you ought to say, paragraph so-and-so, page so-and-so, and this is the way we would recommend that the wording be, because the way you're approaching this is not consistent. So that's my first point. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
David, if I could interject at that point.
Yeah.
I have no doubt that there's probably some inconsistencies here and there because there were multiple individuals working on it. On the larger document, though, that was sent in terms of draft of Acorns policy, we did present it.
Wait a minute, whoa, because we've gotten 3 different documents. Is that the 11-page one?
I think that this one is
It's
the
10
longer
on.
one. It's 10 pages is what I
10 pages.
have.
Yeah.
Well, no, there was an amendment sent out by Sheila that added a page.
If I might,
Okay.
just interject here, Madam Chair. Recommendations which you guys received would be included in this greater document, this larger document that Cindy is referring to. Because when Jonathan Melton met with us, he suggested that we take the present document, the present policy, and as we are revising it, we indicate specifically in that one section what is being revised. So what you don't have in front of you is the entire policy with each of these recommendations under that particular section. You just received a concise document. And I think it would address your concerns, David, if you had the larger document in front of you.
Genevieve, are you talking about the 11-page document?
It would actually be longer than 11 pages once these recommendations are added.
No. I understand that. My only question is, we got one document, we got an 11-page document, and then we got with it, we got a 4-page document. And then at a later date, we got a 5-page document, which I presumed was the final, our final working draft, or your all's final working draft that you were going to take to the city council. And my only point is that whatever you're going to take to the city, to Jonathan or whomever, whatever you're going to take to them, if you've got a specific recommendation in terms of wording, which you definitely do in quite a few of these, be consistent. Make whatever areas that you want to change the wording in, do it, and have that as a paragraph under that section of the existing policy, so people know exactly what it is that we're asking to be changed. That's my first point. Second point, and I've only got 2 other things I want to raise, and I won't say anything more. But the second point I want to say is we are not consistent in this document in terms of whether the Acorns unit is going to be a referral unit or a service provider unit. And you can't have both. It's got to be one or the other. And the second thing is that we, in one place, we have got sworn officers in there. And in another one of these recommendations, there are no sworn officers. We are not consistent. I mean, that's item 17. So at any rate, I won't say any more.
I think
Gerald,
The
hold
point is
on,
not to
Gerald.
be consistent.
Gerald,
The point was not to be consistent. The point was to include everybody's concerns as recommendations. Okay, so it wasn't the subcommittee's job to choose a side and say, these are recommendations we're making. We took in all of your concerns and said, well, these concerns now are twofold. One is some that say, hey, non-sworn, let's rewrite the whole thing, start with the unit. The other part is, well, the current unit's already operation and there's problems in the current operation. And so recommendations for both types, that's for the board to kind of decide overall, okay, and the whole point of Cindy's thing is this is, hey, these are all the concerns and recommendations for those concerns from the board itself to the city council. Okay, and again, these are not policy recommendations final to the police department. These are the concerns that we have in order to have further conversations so that we can, as a board, get back more information to you to sort of now draft official, depending on which way the board wants to go. Okay, and that's the whole reason why these are just all the recommendations and from the concerns that the board members have put forward. They just fall into 2 categories. So these are not the final ones. These are just the pre-steps. So like I said, what you're seeing are not policy.
Madam Chair, I think Jeremy has a comment, and then I propose that we choose one of these 3 documents, even if we have to go over a little bit today, and actually create one board policy, talk through what Gerald is talking about, these differing perspectives. Most of it seems to be on the same page to me, but after Jeremy speaks, I would like to propose that we choose either the 4-page or the 10-page document that I'm looking at that Ms. Cottle mentioned, and discuss tonight what our board recommendations are so that we can give a unified front to the police department and await their response. I thought that's what we were doing tonight. Is that correct?
that's correct. Jeremy,
I was just confused, Madam Chair. I'm not in policy and procedure committee. I read all that the committee sent, and I thought I was ready to make a motion to move forward with what you all have done. I thought, so it's not.
No.
Because Dr. Cottle I'm sorry, Madam Chair, isn't Dr. Cottle in this committee and her specialty is behavioral health?
correct.
And did Dr. Cottle have the opportunity to share her thoughts about it? My
Correct.
isn't in that, Dr. Cottle. And so I don't know. Yeah, I'm so confused.
Again, Jeremy, like Gerald said, that all these recommendations came from the board and we
Correct.
put them together. So it's to flush out what the board, what we're gonna do to have the final draft. This is not the final draft. So we have to do what Greer was saying, we have to choose what final draft we're gonna do so we can be able to finalize the recommendations so we can present them to the city council before we actually meet with Raleigh Police Department.
Yes, ma'am. And I also thought Mr. Takano shared that it's gonna come back after the dialogue with, well, this is the policy, and it's gonna come back to policy and procedure, and
Correct.
I'll be quiet, sorry.
That's
Thank you.
okay. Cindy?
To reiterate what both Jeremy and Greer said, I agree with Greer. We should pick a document for tonight and go with that. I think this stage, to speak again to David's concern, is that we were presenting as a subcommittee, compiling information to present to this full board, that we could then compile that information into a document to present to the city council, then to the police. So it was really about ensuring that, you know, we got feedback from the entire board, not just from the subcommittee.
Well, I will stand corrected then, because I had understood that we were going to adopt these and then have discussion with the city council. And my position is, I don't think that they are not consistent, they're inconsistent. So I don't know what one would talk to the city council about in terms of what the board's position is.
But David, we have already established, this is just, we compiled all the recommendations that the whole board sent to us. Now we have to choose which two that we're actually going to use so we can begin to compile it and revise what we need for before we bring it back to actually adopt it and go to city council. Greer, this is our last comment on it, so we can go ahead and adopt which one. So Jeremy can have an opportunity. Demetrius, hold just 1 second. Demetrius, can we have a little few more minutes after? Thank you. Okay, Greer, go ahead.
I was just going to suggest two things. One, that we go about 15 minutes after, and two, that we go and look at the 10-page document that has the green and yellow highlights. I do think it's a bit confusing to understand if these were general recommendations that the whole board agreed with, or if there were, conflicting recommendations. So I guess I would just propose that, yes, we go a little after, and I would recommend the 10-page document starting at the top. I know Johnny Thomas and others had some questions about the mission, and then walk through these recommendations and say, yes, we agree with them as written, or no, we have, someone has a contention with what is currently proposed. I think that's the easiest. I think we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. I think we should pull up the 10-pager and go from there, but that just looks like the easiest document to walk through. I see some nodding of heads, so.
Ms. Genevieve.
The only comment I have is I think that's going to take more than 10 or 15 minutes.
Well, that's
Agreed.
fine. Well, I have till 8:30, but I was just suggesting we start somewhere. And last time we extended the meeting, we went until 8:15. I mean, Madam Chair, we've also gone longer than that to do a recommendation, but I know it's a weekday, so I was going to leave that timing up to you. I just figured if we could at least go until 8:15 or 8:20.
Well, I've already asked Dimitri, so could we go a little bit over? How many members would like the 10-page document to go?
It's fine, I don't care.
Okay, everybody, okay, we're gonna start with the 10-page document. I'm gonna let Cindy start with that document.
That's fine.
I'm sorry, Cindy, go ahead and start with that document with 1.
So the first recommended change had to do with the purpose or mission in terms of determining whether or not it was involved in, and Gerald did quite a bit of work on this, so correct me if I'm wrong, or jump in if you want, Gerald, is whether or not we were going to have sworn or non-sworn professionals, and if this was going to be a service or not. The rationale, I think we uniformly agree that the current purpose as written with Acorns is in conflict, internally inconsistent as well. And we felt that it duplicates a lot of community services and waste resources of the police department itself that it probably does not have to waste. We felt that it was redundant with existing CIT programs, and the problem that I in particular had with it was throughout the document is the lack of clarity in terms of whether or not it was a service providing or healthcare service providing entity or not. And I think the policy as written describes it as both having a police function and a mental health or health function. So I think it's internally inconsistent.
Well said.
I agree. I would just make one suggestion under the recommended change policy, and that is to plug in the word services after crisis intervention. So it would then read provide alternative crisis intervention services and opportunities. I think that should be plural, opportunities to connect to community resources, yada, yada, yada. But other than that, it looks good to me. I just think services is an important word there after the word intervention.
My only concern there, Greer, is that if you do that, and I'd like to Cindy's response on this, if you add the term service, then you open the door for the social workers in the Acorns unit to actually get into a counseling modality. And also in this document, they talk about a growth program. You've got them in the situation of developing a rehabilitation plan, which I think is far beyond the RPD. So I don't think that's a wise thing. I think you're opening the door for something that you don't want.
Okay, so if we just say provide alternative crisis intervention, is that not a service that that team is providing?
No, well, it is, but it is intervening, and also it says in that next sentence to connect them with community resources. That's what the other CRT units that I have reviewed, that every one of them has that function as a referral function, not a service function.
Well, David,
Not a patient provider function.
well, I would love to know what Gerald's thoughts are here. I'm just looking, if you go scroll down in the bullet points, it says Acorns personnel would handle calls for service. So I was just trying to make that uniform and say that we want them to provide the services that people are calling for.
Gerald?
No.
The calls for service are more likely just requests for 911. And really why I left out service, where you want to insert service. I understand your context. The context is written there as I left out the word service out of there was because it was another way of saying that the primary function is de-escalation, not service. De-escalate, be able to come in, de-escalate, and then refer to professionals. Okay, and they're not going to be the professionals themselves. Their job would be to de-escalate a situation, bring it down, stress level down, in which they can now, after a situation de-escalated, refer,
exactly.
refer to other services, but not provide the service to themselves.
Okay,
that's the main reason why I left that.
I'm cool with leaving that. I still think opportunities needs to be plural, or we need the word the.
Where is that, Greer?
I think it says the purpose of the Acorns team is to provide alternative crisis intervention and opportunity to connect. It needs to be opportunities or the opportunity. Other than that, I'm cool with leaving service out.
Opportunities say fine to me.
Next one, Cindy.
Okay, if somebody could make the edits, because my computer is just letting me, it's not letting me edit. I was going to add that, Greer, but I can't.
I can make the grammatical edits on mine and send it to you. Or
very good, thank you.
Okay, I'll make the grammatical edits.
Okay, let's move to
the next section that is highlighted is the definition of Acorns. And again, this overlaps with the previous, where we talk about CIT, trained police officers and safe law enforcement response. And again, the definition of Acorns, it's a repeat kind of the previous section.
Right.
That we feel like they needed to define it distinct from a mental health or service providing entity. And to be clear, they say that they're not providing healthcare service, but the way that it's described in this document is descriptive of healthcare service. So they
It
can
leaves
call
the
it
door-
something different, but it
Right.
looks and sounds like healthcare service.
Leaves the door wide open. I agree with
I think
you.
it increases the liability to them as well.
Yes, I agree.
So that's that section.
All right, are we going to just sort of as a performer say yes to each of these recommendations? Like I agree with, all of us agree with recommendation 1 is rewritten. All of us agree with recommendation 2 is rewritten.
I think that'd be easiest. We're moving along.
Yes.
I agree with recommendation 2 as written.
Okay, good.
Okay.
I would agree with that. In addition, just as a quick addendum, I'm approaching a hard stop. So anything we can do to expedite it, if my voice is to be included in this, would be great. If not, then I'm happy with whatever recommendations come out of the board.
Okay, let's go with recommendation 3.
Okay, the next one pertains to the mission, I think is on page 5. The mission of the Acorns teams is to de-escalate persons in crisis, there's grammatical there, and provide immediate referrals for persons experiencing homelessness, mental illness, and substance use disorders. I think that is,
Good.
again, consistent with the prior ones.
Excellent.
Next one.
Okay. Conducting the Acorns team mission, you see the areas that are highlighted there pertain to social worker and officer who are trained to respond to an array of crises and offer referral services. The recommendation is to remove "and officer" and to clarify what they mean by "to an array of crises and offer referral services."
May I advise you, Cindy, if we're going to do that, you need to change "are" to "is."
Okay.
Can you say that again, David? Sorry, I'm making the grammatical.
Next to the last line where it says social worker and who, it says "are," it should be is trained to respond. Do you see that?
I do, but is it not talking about the social worker and the officer? Those are
No,
two.
the officer is deleted.
So we're deleting the word officer. Is that correct, Cindy? did-
In the yellow part on page 5.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, we're highlighting it for everyone else to see what they had written. So that's written as they wrote it. And then what we're
Right.
suggesting in the green there, it says "and office." So you could put an R at the letter R. I
Okay,
think is
got
what,
it.
yeah, so "and officer." So we were leaving intact how they wrote it. That's the yellow part. And then the green part is where it says "remove "and office."
Got it. So David, if we're removing officer, your point is it should be is that correct?
Yes, that's
All right.
correct. Yes,
Noted.
thank you.
Next.
Gerald, did you have something? I saw you lean forward.
No, I agree with David. He's correct.
Next.
So later on page 6 is before the Acorn team can provide services to individuals, the individual will be required to sign an informed consent form, which is attached as Appendix A to this policy. It'll be the responsibility of the Acorns team member to review the form and the individual receiving the services and to obtain the individual's signature prior to beginning the provision of services. Specifically, an individual shall be informed that any self-incriminating statements made to any Acorns team member is not confidential and that such information may be disclosed for criminal investigation or prosecution. So this was one of the bigger areas of discussion, and we recommended that they delete the entire section that I just read.
Here, here.
And we gave rationalizations that I think are of benefit to the community and of benefit to the police department. And explanation that I think that would be helpful for the city council to understand why we made those recommendations. We noted that there were multiple consent forms within that one appendix. For example, the consent to treatment, evaluation, sharing information with others, even non-treatment providers, to be interviewed, to be investigated, to consent to research. And then I noted that most ethics boards require such consents to identify any and all potential risks, and as well as alternatives to that service. And so that was one of the primary concerns. Any
So
questions on that?
what's the bottom line recommendation then?
The
You're
bottom line
deleting that.
recommendations, there were several. There were, so I won't read them all, but
It's just the bullets after the word recommendations highlighted
Yeah.
in green, right? They're right underneath.
that's correct.
Well, let me, Cindy, help me understand, what is the definition then of informed consent form?
Well, I don't have the actual definition that, might be.
No.
But
The reason I
But
asked-
basically, it needs to be informed. The person has to be informed of what the risks are, what the benefits are, what the alternatives to that treatment or service or whatever is happening are. And they, I think, also need to understand, if they are not consenting, if they are not providing that consent, well, let me back up, that the consent is voluntary. If they're not providing that consent, or if they want to talk to a lawyer, if they want to talk to somebody, there's also the implication that the person is competent to.
Right, Cindy, let me ask you then, in one of the documents that was in the policy, it said that they would, whatever they said could be used against them criminally. That doesn't permit this, does it? Does your wording permit that?
My wording is to delete that whole thing and rewrite that entire consent needs to be redone.
Understood
And
that.
it was too much for this document, but it needs to be redone.
Understand that, but my question is, when you tell when the reader sees your first sentence there, ask to sign an informed consent form, does one know that that is not permitting them to have incrimination, that's not the right word, incriminatory comments are held against them?
As the policy is currently written,
No, I'm saying the way you want it written.
I don't write how I haven't said how I wanted it written here. I've said that this needs to be deleted and that substantial work would need to be done so that it could be rewritten. I have not recommended a certain language for the rewriting.
Very well.
Yeah, Mr. Blaine, I think it's our intention to kind of nuke that whole thing because it just doesn't work.
Okay, very good.
An informed consent would basically be a waiver of their rights to either you're getting help or you're getting arrested,
But if I sign, help me understand.
Yeah.
If I signed that, am I making myself liable for being incriminated for something I tell you?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, as it stands, yes. And that's why
right.
we don't think that works.
I know it doesn't work, but
Yeah.
Dr. Hamilton had a question. Dr. Hamilton.
you're muted, Dr. Hamilton.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just wiping my face.
Okay.
I think Greer had something and then Johnny had something.
Yes, I wanted to just ask, I see it in here, but if you could help explain for us, Dr. Cottle, and I'm making sure there are no community questions in the chat, but I know something that may come up is, if the person is not competent enough to sign anything, or if they're in such an emergency that they're not willing to sign anything, but they're just talking, do we have any provision in these bullets that, won't incriminate them or provides a pathway? I know it says consider referral to an outside agency, but in that moment, if they're not complying or in a state of mind to sign a form, what are we saying that the Acorns unit should do?
Well, I'm saying that nothing until this is completely erased and rewritten.
I see.
But then also, at that point, if they're not competent, then they should be referred to, a place like Wadebrook, where they work with individuals who are not competent.
Right.
Or they can at least have that assessed formally by a professional.
Okay.
That's
Johnny, last
independent-
question.
Yeah, independent of the police.
Johnny, last question, and then we're gonna are we gonna agree or not agree, but we have to move on. Time is getting us.
Okay.
Johnny, go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'll make this quick then. See, to me, when I'm given an informed consent, the person sits down and explains to me my right. This is the service we're gonna give you. This is what it involves. Now, then it's up to me to make the decision. I'm gonna agree with this and take the service, or I'm not gonna agree with this and not take the service. That's where informed consent is always hit with me. It gives you your rights and allow you to say yes or no.
Okay.
I agree. And it wasn't clear to me. I don't know what their practices are. It wasn't clear to me that the form did that in and of itself. But beyond that, the form was so broad as to allow a consent for a whole range of things that are nowhere near the purpose of this program.
I'm
I
sorry.
move that we accept this recommendation.
Could I
Okay.
just, could I interject? Are we saying, I know we're deleting this portion that reads before the Acorns team, blah, blah, blah. I just want to clarify. Are we saying that they need to rewrite or get rid of the informed consent form itself, Appendix A?
Yes,
current- their
redoing,
current
they gotta
consent
redo
form.
it. Yes, they
In
gotta
its
redo it.
form.
Is that clear that
yes.
that we want Appendix A gone?
That's
In-
really a good point, Greer.
Because it
In
isn't
its
to me.
form now.
Because
I
RPD,
think-
what I'm saying is RPD already has an informed consent form. I've got it right here. We talked about it at our last retreat. And this is saying we need to delete this paragraph that talks about the form, but it sounds like we're all saying they need to go back and look at that form, which is called Appendix A again.
They do.
I'm seeing some nodding of heads. So let's make sure we make that clear. I can make a note here, but
I think-
we want them to reform that form. Is that correct? Because we're saying it's not
Yes.
clear.
Yes, and so that first bullet, Greer, after recommendations, where it says before the Acorns team, that really should be cleaned up to say that I think that's where we need to say that the form needs to be rewritten, and a
Agreed.
procedure to accompany the policy needs to be written about how the consent is formed.
Dr. Cotto, we lost you, ma'am.
We lost you at the
Breaking
end.
up.
We lost you at the
I'm
end, but
sorry.
I've got you. I've made that edit and I'll flag it for your attention. So I guess we just need
Let's-
approval.
Let's move on to the next one.
Okay,
Do we
so the
do we have
next one
approval
on-
on this one? I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're finished with this one.
Okay.
I am looking, there's some additional recommendations regarding record keeping, and those pertain to keeping those clear of, let's see, the person receiving responsibility services. The responsibility of maintaining records would be social work, not
Right.
police department, and you would require a subpoena and all of that, just as you normally would in other
Right.
locations.
Right.
Next one, Cindy.
Very bottom of page 8, intervention and investigation. We don't agree with the investigation function, purpose, mission. So we recommend that that be deleted and that it pertain more to referral services.
Agreed.
Investigation, we noted, implies criminal investigation. It's actually the same word. So, and then we made recommendations pertaining to the quote, care and safety first, enforcement last approach. That is a quote from theirs. We recommend removing that quote. And the reasoning was that Acorns should not be arresting anyone. Acorns personnel notify police only when required by law. Sworn personnel should be assigned, should not be assigned to Acorns.
I
Good.
agree. It
Good.
looks like Mr. Thomas is shaking his head though, so I just want to be clear. It says in there, Acorn should not be arresting anyone. That's the language. So I just want to make sure we're clear before we move ahead, because this is a big step.
Well, that's
I will
consistent with,
agree that they shouldn't be arresting. They shouldn't be arresting people because they're being called to provide a service after an initial police interaction. So I will agree with that, but
Okay,
Let's
next one.
move forward.
We recommend,
You're breaking up again, Cindy.
sorry, I'm trying to sit at a certain spot. Supervision and team management, the supervision should be tasked to a lieutenant and the Acorns sergeant. The sergeant has a primary responsibility, supervisory responsibility. This is where it does, the existing policy says both sworn and social worker team members are involved. Now, we recommended removing that. And we recommended things that were consistent with what we said in purpose. We referenced the purpose up above.
Looks good.
Good to me.
We talked about the organizational culture and directives. We recommended the removal of the following. Acorns team supervisors and team members shall be aware that social workers, unlike officers, we recommended removing unlike officers. And as you see, the reasoning is without sworn and non-sworn doing the same function, there is no code of ethics conflict concern. So the driving force behind this recommendation had to do with the social worker code of ethics, which is quoted there, certain aspects of it, or at least. So we wanted to make it more in line and consistent with social worker code of ethics and with the statements made by the social worker organizations, professional organizations, sorry.
Next one.
I think that's it on this
Yeah.
document.
Yeah, that's it.
Wow, look at us knocking that out before 8:20. I'm proud. I did have a question for Dr. Cotto if we're through with these recommendations before we hop off.
Okay.
Dr. Cotto, so Johnny asked an important question too, and just that response versus referral. So in the case that someone is undergoing a mental health emergency, regardless of, well, not regardless, using these recommendations and your, I guess, personal opinion, what is your, could you kind of help at least me or us walk through what your ideal response would be by, I guess, Acorns, if we're not going to say RPD, if someone's having a mental health crisis or emergency and someone sees it, calls 911, maybe someone standing in the middle of the road, obstructing traffic, what does that response from whomever look like to you? I think that will help the
That's
community
a great
listen
question.
in.
Yeah, I don't think that they should call 911. I think there should be a avenue number, 911. So I would back up there. Am I breaking up?
You're breaking up.
Thank you.
You're
Okay,
breaking up a little bit, but I think I heard you say that you don't think that if someone sees someone in a mental health crisis, they should call 911. You think there should be a separate number. Is that correct?
That's correct. Or they could call the crisis intervention service. There's Wakebrook. I worked there, places like that. I think those places exist. So over and above what I think, I hear the concern, but I think calling 911 invites a different response. And so I don't think that that's the one that we need right now. And so I think calling a place like Wakebrook, calling a mental health crisis phone number or what have you, bypasses that whole part. It's faster, it's more efficient and safer. And I do think that, I see you, David, I'm going to finish this one thing part. Raleigh, Wake County has a number of places already in existence where these individuals can get treatment and referral services and whole wraparound services. And so I think there's a place for RPD. I don't know that this is it. And I don't know it's the most cost efficient way for them to use their resources right now.
Right. So in terms, sorry, let me just knock down this point. In terms of recommendations, do we have that recommendation listed somewhere? A is my question, that Acorns is not 911. And B, before we go to Wakebrook or whatever, I just want to understand if we're going to promote or support and we're recommending this Acorns program, Acorns needs to have a number, because you listed about 3 different places and the common citizen is not, we might on this call know what you're talking about, but the common citizen is going to want to punch in a number, right? Or they may not have time to search the internet for Wakebrook's number. So are you saying that we need a separate Acorns number? And then Acorns can have the contact information of Wakebrook and all of these places. We just don't want folks calling 911. And if that's the case, was there not a recommendation that this be housed under the fire department? Because there's no way to separate 911 from the police.
They
department.
have a number, Greer. They have a number.
Acorns already
Yeah.
has a number.
Acorns do have a number. It only operate, I think they said, it's not a night number because they're just getting up and running. They only have a few staffing, but they do have a separate number.
Acorns does.
Yeah, Acorns has a number.
Okay, and sorry, David, did I misread the fire department that we're asking for this to be put up under the fire department?
No, we never said the fire department.
Wait a minute, one of these recommendations did
It's-
have that.
Yeah,
There's
the
a
word fire department.
consideration.
Yes.
There's a consideration that it.
But
needs
it
to-
was a consideration. Somebody wrote a consideration. I'm,
Cindy,
we're running out of time.
I-
I do want to get back to Johnny because he did have one thing, madam, if we have a moment.
Okay, we only have just a few more minutes because we have to wrap this up. We did not get to Jeremy's report tonight. And at some point, we need to really
Okay.
talk with community engagement, but that didn't happen tonight. Sorry, Jeremy. But this last question, that has to be it because we have to close this out.
Oh, okay, real quick. Everybody on this board does realize that if anybody sees anything, they're gonna call 911. So is there a way to integrate the dispatch unit to train them or integrate somebody who knows about Acorn into that? Because hey, look, they're gonna call 911.
That's exactly right.
Every
Thank you,
emergency
Johnny.
is gonna be called. There is no Acorn. I'm not gonna call Acorn. I'm gonna call 911 if I see something.
That's right.
Because that's the way I was brought up. That's what I know. That's what my habit is.
That's right. And all of the other units in the country do that too.
But what we probably have to do is recommend that they, all sworn officers, or if they call 911, if it's a mental, issue, that Acorn will be, dispatched.
So I'm
That's-
taking notes here. So I think what we need to say is that all 911 operators, right, should be
Right.
should be knowledgeable as it comes to mental health intervention, and they should know all about Acorns to decide whether or not to transfer that call to Acorns or the police. Is that correct?
Well,
Yes.
one thing we
That's what
have to do is educate the community too. We're gonna have to educate that community on, that's one of the community engagement thing, about Acorn and about their services.
That's true, but in terms of tangible action, Johnny's right. Throughout history, folks see an emergency, they call 911. So again,
Right.
putting this onus on the police, what should I, write down here? We want all 911 operators to be trained. I'm kind of referring this to Dr. Cottle because again, what if the operator chooses to send the police instead of Acorns?
Yeah, that's a systemic issue that I think that we do have to address. That's going to be bigger than this one document, to be honest with you. But I fully agree that that's
Daryl.
something we need to definitely work towards.
Just
Gerald.
put down 911 communication priority training. That's how they dispatch out priority to who, whether it's a fire call, police call, whatever else. So just put priority training for EMS or
Very
for
good.
911.
Yes,
Very
sir.
good, Gerald.
Gerald, are 911 operators, to your knowledge, currently CIT trained? Are they all required to be CIT trained?
That I couldn't tell you, but they have very specialized training on how to prioritize which kind of calls go to other than the
Right.
police department and the police department.
Right.
Thank you.
But that's essentially, we could hash out the particulars later.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, we have finished this and we have definitely went over our time. Sorry, Jeremy. We're going to have to table this community engagement. I thank you all. Gerald, did you have a question? Did you have something to say, Gerald?
No, I think Mr. Takano did that. Oh, you're good.
No, okay. We'll get ready to close this out. It's been a great meeting. Greer, thank you for making the changes. I appreciate it so much. Cindy, thank you so much for going through sufficiency. Thank everybody. Thank you, Dr. Hamilton, for coming. And we hope to see you again, and we'll look forward in working with you we're gonna end this tonight. So we are agreeing that this document is gonna be the document that we start cleaning up and revising, correct?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, we all agree. Okay, thank you, Greer. Just send that to Cindy, and you all have a great night, and I appreciate you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.